ब्रह्मनाथ ओ शांति 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 स्वस्थ। Hello students, in the previous class we discussed about the types of respiration according to the presence of the respiratory organ. We discussed that on the basis of the presence of the respiratory organ, there are four types of respiration. First one is your cutaneous respiration, second one bronchial respiration, third one tracheal respiration, and the fourth one is the pulmonary respiration. Among the four types of respiration, we discussed in detail about the two types of respiration. First one, we discussed the cutaneous respiration, and secondly, we discussed the bronchial type of respiration. In the cutaneous respiration, the respiratory organ is nothing but the moist skin, whereas in the case of the bronchial respiration, the respiratory organ is basically the gills. We discussed number of points under the cutaneous respiration. Further, we discussed that in the bronchial respiration, the gills is divided into two types. One is your external gill, other one is your internal gill. In the external gill, these are basically open to outside and visible from outside. Whereas in the case of the internal gills, these are internally placed. Whereas in the case of the external gills, these are not covered, but in the case of the internal gills, these are covered by a bony-like structure called the operculum. And also we discuss numerous points under the external gills and also under the internal gills. Lastly, we discuss that the type of gill that is present in the bony fish is the filiform or the pectinate gills. Whereas in the case of the cartilaginous fish, the type of gill is called your lamellibranch gills. So this much we have discussed in our previous class in detail. Today we will discuss more two types of respiration on the basis of presence of the respiratory organ. So firstly we discussed the third type of respiration on the basis of according to the presence of the respiratory organ, that is your tracheal respiration. Simply, as the name suggests, the respiration is being done by the help of the trachea. So our first point, respiration is by trachea. Simple point, okay, by trachea. That is why the name suggests the tracheal respiration. Where the tracheal respiration is being found generally? It is found generally in the case of the terrestrial invertebrates like some insect, the centipedes means the annelid, and also in the case of some spiders. Okay, so we'll write our second point that it is found in the terrestrial invertebrates like some insects, centipedes, some spiders, etc. Okay, so in the case of the tracheal respiration, it is generally found in the case of the terrestrial invertebrate like some insects, centipedes, some spider, etc. Okay, basically the tracheal respiration consists of generally the spiracles, trachea and the tracheoles. So the tracheal respiration tracheal respiration consists of the spiracles, then the trachea and tracheoles. Okay. So what are the various segments that are present in the tracheal respiration? You can generally see we have drawn the complete diagram of the, we can say, the respiratory organ in the case of the tracheal type of respiration. Okay, this is the diagram of the arrangement of the trachea and the spiracles, obviously, and this one is the tracheal respiration mode in the case of the, basically we have taken here the cockroach. Okay, I have written the cockroach. We can see this one, the slit like opening, an oval slit like opening that is present, that is called your spiracle. Okay, three main portions are present. This one is your spiracles, this tube like structure, this is called your trachea, and trachea are further branched into various branches such as tracheole, which are submerged inside the, we can say, the muscles. Okay, so we have three parts basically in the tracheal respiration: spiracles, trachea and the tracheoles. So first we will write about the spiracles. What are the spiracles? These are the oval slit like opening, okay, which are present on the lateral side of the animals. You can see here, students, clearly these structures, these are called your spiracles. Okay, these are called your spiracles. Okay, these are slit like opening present on the lateral side of the animals. Okay, let's write down the first point under the spiracles. It is an oval slit like opening. It is an oval slit like opening, okay, present on the lateral side of the animal. Okay, means these are, slit means what, students? You know, slit means some sort of cut. Okay, so these are present, we can say these are oval opening having slit like structure present on the lateral sides, means these are your lateral sides. Okay, these are an oval, rounded or slit like opening present on the lateral side. You can see here these are your spiracles. Okay, these are present on the lateral side having an oval and slit like opening. Okay, next, what is trachea? Trachea, it is a silvery ectodermal tube. It is a silvery ectodermal tube lined by the epithelial cell and internally lined by the, we can say, spiral ring like cuticular structure that is called intima. Okay, so next point, trachea is a silvery ectodermal tube lined by epithelial cells and internally lined by hard spiral ring like cuticular structure called intima. Okay, see, what are the trachea? Trachea, or we can say silvery, means it's somehow it's synonyms to the, it's looks like the silver color. Okay, it is a silvery tube like ectodermal, means what? Ectodermal means it is ectodermal in origin. Okay, it is a silvery tube like structure, or we can say ectodermal tube, okay, which is lined by the epithelial cell. You can see here the cells, these are lined externally by the epithelial cells. Epithelial means always you remember the external or the outer portion. Okay. So the trachea are the tube like structure which are externally we can say lined by the epithelial cell, but internally it is being lined by the spiral ring like hard structure called the intima. Okay, you can see here diagram, students. See, this one is your, we can say, how the respiration is being carried out through the spiracle and the trachea in the case of the cockroach. This one is your arrangement of the trachea and the spiracles in the cockroach. Okay, see what I have done, I will tell you. This one is your opening, slit like opening called the spiracles. Okay, air enters into the atrium, further it goes into the trachea. From the trachea, what it bifurcate, or we can say it is divided into various other fine branches. Those are called your tracheoles. You can see here, those are called your tracheoles, and the tracheoles are being submerged into the muscle, or we can say the tissue, okay, by which they can be easily distributed. Okay, in here the various body fluids are there which helps in distributing the we can say the gaseous exchange is being done. Here, students, you can see here the tracheal cell is present, means it is present in the junction between the trachea and the tracheoles. See, this one is your trachea and this one is your tracheoles, so it is present in the junction between the trachea and the tracheoles, which eventually helps in the carrying out the process of the respiration. This one you can see, this is the somehow we can see the arrangement of the spiracles and the trachea. You can see the spiracles, these are present slit like opening which are present lateral side, or which is present on the lateral side of the animals. Here we are taking the concept of the cockroach. Okay, you can see that all the spiracles are being connected, or we can say the longitudinal trunk, tracheal trunks are being found. That is why I am written here longitudinal tracheal trunks. You can see here these connections, these are called longitudinal tracheal trunks, which forms a longitudinal parallel like structure. You can see here this structure and this structure, this form a parallel like structure, which are connected by the transverse commissure. You can see all these systems are being connected to each other. Okay, these all structure are called transverse commissure. We will read in detail. I have told you in overally. Okay, so what we have discussed now, tracheal respiration, in this the respiration is generally taken or takes place by the trachea. It is basically found in the terrestrial invertebrates like some insects, centipedes means annelids, and also in some spider, etc. Tracheal respiration consists of mainly two important, you can say, spiracles and trachea. For your understanding, I am written spiracle, trachea and the tracheoles. What are the spiracles? It is an oval slit like opening present on the lateral side of the animals. Whereas what is trachea? Trachea is a silvery ectodermal tube. It is a tube like structure which is lined by the epithelial cell. You can see here lined of the epithelial cell. So students, what is ctenidia? These are the arrangement of the cells. How the cells are being arranged, that form is known as your ctenidia, nothing else. Okay. So the trachea is lined by the epithelial cells, and internally it is being lined by hard spiral ring like cuticular structure that is called intima. Okay, students. So this is all about some important points under the tracheal respiration. Please note down. Now students, see we can say the tracheal activity, how it goes on inside we can say the cockroach, and also the various arrangement. Firstly, what is spiracle and what spiracle leads to? Spiracle, first point, see here, the spiracle opens into a space that is called your atrium. This space you can see here, this is called your atrium. So first point, we will write accordingly. Spiracle opens into a space called atrium. Okay. Further, the atrium leads to the trachea, okay, and from the trachea fine branches comes out that are called the tracheoles. So we can write from atrium it leads to tube like structure called trachea, okay, which is further branched into many fine branches called tracheoles, okay, tracheoles, okay, called tracheoles. Okay students, next point. The trachea forms the tracheal trunks. You can see here the trachea forms the tracheal trunks which are present longitudinally, okay, and are present in paired manner and runs parallel to each other. First I will write you, then I will make you understand. Trachea forms longitudinal tracheal trunks, forms longitudinal paired tracheal trunks which are parallel, or we can write which runs parallel, See what I have written. Students, I have done only one sort of, we can say, trachea, or only one segment I have only done, okay. If I will elaborate this structure, it is somehow look like this. Means these are the, we can say, the spiracles. It is open into atrium. Further it goes on to the trachea, okay, and these are the various commissure, means these are interconnected, and these like structures are called your longitudinal tracheal trunks. So we can say the trachea, these are the trachea, students. See students clearly, these are the spiracles, okay, these are the trachea, these trachea forms the tracheal or longitudinal tracheal trunks which are present in a paired form and longitudinal in structure, and both are parallel to each other, okay. See what I have written. Trachea forms longitudinal, means this one is longitudinal, lateral means this one, okay, longitudinal, this one is your longitudinal, okay. So this one we can say this is your longitudinal like structure, and paired, this one is your, we can say, paired like structure, okay, trunks which runs parallel. You can see this is runs parallel to each other, okay. So that is why it is written. So the next point we have to write that in the case of the, you have seen clearly students, these are the, see, you do not confuse, okay. This one is your tracheal trunks, okay, this one is your tracheal trunks, these are your various tracheal trunks, okay, tracheal trunks. These tracheal trunks are, we can say, can be present dorsal, ventral and lateral, and are interconnected by the transverse commissure. See, this is one is your, we can say, longitudinal section, this one is your transverse section, okay. So these all, we can say, the longitudinal tracheal trunks are being connected by the, we can say, the transverse commissure. So we can write trachea can be present dorsal, ventral, okay, lateral, okay, tracheal trunks, okay, can be present dorsal, ventral or lateral, and lateral which are connected by transverse commissure. Okay, means the joining portion. Okay, these are, we can say, the longitudinal tracheal trunks. Okay, this can be present dorsally, this can be present, we can say, ventrally and on the lateral. Okay, but it have the connection in between, those are called the transverse commissure. So that is why it is written tracheal trunks can be present dorsal, ventral and lateral which are connected by the transverse commissure. Okay, and the last point, the truncules, you can see it penetrate into the tissue. It penetrate into the tissue where the gaseous exchange can take place. Gaseous exchange means the O2 and CO2. Okay, the tracheoles penetrate into the tissue where the gaseous exchange can takes place. Basically, gaseous exchange means what? O2 and CO2. Okay. So, what we have discussed? See, first point, the spiracles opens into a space that is called atrium. From atrium, it leads to tube-like structure called the trachea, which is further branched into many fine branches-like structure called the tracheoles. Okay, next, the trachea forms, these trachea forms the longitudinal paired-like structure called the longitudinal tracheal trunk. Okay, and these longitudinal tracheal trunks which are present, these runs parallel to each other. See, this one and this one, these run parallel to each other. Next point, the tracheal trunks, these tracheal trunks can be present dorsally, ventrally and also in the laterally. Okay, and are connected by, we can say, various transverse commissures. See, these are the various connections, you can see, these are the various connections, these are connected by the transverse commissure. Lastly, these truncules is penetrated into the muscle, or we can say the tissue, where due to the help of the various presence of the body fluids, or we can say simply by the help of the, as it directly penetrates into the tissue, there the gaseous exchange takes place of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. Okay, so please note down some points under the tracheal respiration. Note down. Students, some more points under the tracheal respiration. Okay, in the case of the tracheal respiration, no transport medium is used. Transport medium means what, students? See, obviously in the case of the respiration, blood plays a major role, which acts as a, we can say, transport medium. So, but in the case of the tracheal respiration, the respiration is directly done by the trachea. Okay, means no blood activity is seen in the case of the tracheal respiration. So, first point, no transport medium takes place or is seen in the case of the tracheal respiration. So, first point we can write, no transport medium is present in tracheal respiration. Okay, that is why we can say, students, that blood have no role, or we can say blood is not involved in the case of the tracheal respiration. So we can write our next point, blood is not involved in this respiration, or we can say in this type of respiration, in this type of respiration. Okay, so how the respiration is being done? It directly, the respiration is done directly by the windpipe or the trachea. Okay, so the respiration the respiration is done directly by the what? By the windpipe or trachea, where the gaseous exchange takes place. Where the gaseous exchange such as O2 and CO2 takes place. Okay. If we will take the case of the inspiration, see what happens. See what happens. You can only tell that in the case of the air, oxygen basically enters into the spiracles. From the spiracle, it will enter into the trachea. From the trachea, the oxygen will flow into the tracheoles. From the tracheoles, it will enter into the tissue, where it will release the oxygen. And similarly, vice versa, the carbon dioxide will be eliminated and the carbon dioxide will be produced as the byproduct. Then the carbon dioxide will enter into the tracheoles. From the tracheoles, it will enter into the trachea, and from the trachea, it will release through outside by the spiracles. One point you should remember, that before going to the trachea, from the trachea into the tracheole, it will pass through the tracheal cell. You always remember. Okay, so we'll write down our next point. First, the O2 enters into the spiracle. Okay, from the spiracle, the oxygen will flow into the trachea. From the trachea, it will flow into the, remember, from the trachea, it will flow into the tracheal cell. Then it will flow into the tracheoles, into the tracheal cell. From the tracheal cell, it will come into the tracheoles. Tracheoles. From the tracheoles, it will, the air or the oxygen will be released. Means what? In the tissue, the oxygen will be released. What happens in the tissue? We can simply write from the tracheoles, it releases O2 into the tissue. Okay, so this is the, we can say, some sort of inspiration, and expiration also it is the opposite. Means, see, as I said, oxygen enters into the through the spiracle, then it will go to the trachea, then from the trachea it will pass through the tracheal cell and finally into the tracheoles. Okay, and the tracheoles, it is being submerged or penetrated into the tissue, where it will release the oxygen. Similarly, carbon dioxide will be produced as the byproduct. The carbon dioxide will enter into the tracheole. From the tracheole, it will pass through the tracheal cell and it will go outside by the help of the tube-like structure called the trachea, and by the spiracle it will eliminated from outside the from the inside of the body from the body to the outside environment. Okay, so basically in the tracheal respiration, no transport medium is being present in the tracheal respiration, or we can say in the tracheal respiration no transport medium is present. That is why blood is not involved in this type of respiration. Respiration is done directly by the windpipe or the trachea, where the gaseous exchange takes place. Inspiration, as I told you, the pathway, oxygen enters into the spiracles, then it enters the trachea, then passing through the tracheal cell, it will go to the tracheoles, which are penetrated into the tissue, where they will release the oxygen into the tissue, and vice versa, the oxygen will come out. Okay, so this is all about, we can say, the tracheal respiration. Further, we'll discuss the pulmonary respiration. Please note down. Now students, we will discuss the fourth type of respiration according to the respiratory organ, that is your pulmonary respiration. What is the type of respiration? That is called your pulmonary respiration. Students, we discussed that in the case of the animals who basically respires by the help of the lungs. In those cases, we said that the type of respiration is the pulmonary respiration. So your common point, first point is, in the case of the pulmonary respiration, the respiration is by lungs. Okay. So first point, the respiration is by lungs. Okay, common point. Second point, this type of respiration is generally found in most terrestrial animals. Okay, it is found in most cases of terrestrial animals. Okay, means those animals which are terrestrial in nature, means those who resides in or means live on the land. In those type of the animals or the animals which are terrestrial in nature or those who live in the land, those are basically or generally most of them are having the pulmonary type of respiration, because due to they have the respiratory organ that is called your lungs. Next students, this lungs is generally divided into two types. One is your diffusion lungs, another one is your ventilation lungs. So what is diffusion lungs and what is ventilation lungs? Students, diffusion lungs is generally simple in nature, and basically the gaseous exchange takes place by the help of the, we can say, the simple diffusion process. Okay, so your first point is the lungs are simple in structure, okay, and the gaseous exchange takes place through the diffusion. Okay, the gaseous exchange takes place through diffusion. Okay students, what are the common examples? This type of lungs is generally seen in the case of the some spiders, then some scorpions also, okay, and snails also. We can write spiders, snails, and also in the case of the scorpions, okay, etc. So next is, what is the ventilation lungs? Okay, we discussed about what is the type of lungs that is called the diffusion lungs. Next is your ventilation lungs. Students, we discussed that in the diffusion lungs these are very simple in structure, but ventilation lungs, which are basically found in mostly the typical to the vertebrates, means if the animal is a vertebrate, then obviously the type of lungs that is present inside the animal will be the ventilation lungs. Obviously we are belonging to the vertebrates, so in our case also the type of lungs that is present is known as the ventilation lungs. Students, see why I have told ventilation lungs. Simply ventilation means what? We in the house we have the ventilation or the ventilator, means what? Means by which the air can pass. Similarly students, in the case of the ventilation lungs, the air passes through a tube like structure into an elastic lungs. Okay, let's write the first point. Ventilation lungs, these are basically typical to vertebrates in which air passes inside the tube into the elastic lungs. Okay, what I have written, these are basically typical to the invertebrate in which the air passes inside the tube, inside the elastic inside the passage inside the tube into the elastic lungs. See student, these are basically ventilation lungs are found in the case of the vertebrates, in which the air passes inside the tube into the elastic lungs. Okay, and the lungs is present inside or located inside the thoracic cavity or thoracic chamber. Okay, this is our thoracic cavity, this is our abdominal cavity, the lower portion is our abdominal cavity. Obviously the lungs, as it is present here, that is why it is present, this region is what? Thoracic cavity or thoracic chamber. So we can write that the lungs are located inside the thoracic chamber. Lungs are present inside the thoracic chamber. Okay, next students, what is the direction of the flow of the air in the case of the ventilation lungs? See, first you will read in detail in our coming classes, but for the general knowledge I will tell you. First the air passes from the nostrils, this opening is called your nostrils, then it will go to the nasal chamber, then it will pass on to the pharynx, larynx, then trachea, then lastly the bronchi and the bronchioles. Okay, don't worry, you will read in detail, I am just writing the passage. First the air passes from the nostril into the nasal chamber. From the nasal chamber it will pass on to the pharynx, okay, pharynx region, then into the larynx region. Pharynx means it is the common passage for the food and water, the food and the air. Pharynx, then it will pass on to the larynx. From the larynx it will go to the tube-like structure, that is called the trachea or windpipe, trachea. Then from the trachea it will go to the bronchi, and from bronchi it will pass on to the bronchioles. This will pass on to the bronchioles. Okay, from the bronchi the various fine branches are coming out, okay, by which it passes the air into the elastic lungs, that is called your bronchioles. Okay, so this is the passage of the air. First the air comes into the nostrils. From the nostril the air will pass to the nasal chamber. Okay, next the nasal chamber it will pass on the pharynx, then larynx region, then trachea, windpipe, then to the bronchi and the bronchioles, by which it will go into the, we can say, the lungs. Okay, and obviously the common example we can take in the case of the reptiles, mammals, apes, etc. Common example are reptiles, apes, mammals, etc. Okay, so these consist of the ventilation type of lungs. Okay students, so what we have discussed now, pulmonary respiration means generally the respiration by lungs. It is found in the most cases of the terrestrial animals. Diffusion lungs, these are lungs are simple in structure by which the gaseous exchange takes place through the simple diffusion. So example, some spiders, snails, scorpions, etc. Ventilation type lungs, typical to the vertebrates, in which the air passes, okay, air passes inside the tube into the elastic lungs. Okay, next, elastic lungs, why I have told you, because obviously when the air will go, it will, we can say it will expand. When the air will released, it will synchronize. So that is why it is told as the elastic lungs. Obviously the lungs are present inside the thoracic chamber, and the passage of the air from the first, the air passes through the nostril, then into the nasal chamber, then the pharynx region, larynx region, trachea, bronchi, and lastly the bronchioles. Common example, reptiles, apes, mammals, etc. So students, today we have discussed the remaining two types of respiration on the basis of the presence of the respiratory organ. In the previous class, we discussed about the cutaneous respiration and the branchial respiration. Today, in detail, we discussed about the tracheal respiration and the pulmonary respiration. Obviously, in the tracheal respiration, the respiratory organ or the respiration is done by the trachea, and in the case of the pulmonary respiration, the respiration is by lungs. In the tracheal respiration, the tracheal respiration is generally found in the case of some spiders, okay, the centipedes, which are the annelids, and also the pulmonary respiration, it is found in most cases of the terrestrial animals. Next, we discussed that in the tracheal respiration, two main things or the reasons are being concerned. One is we can say the spiracle, other one is your trachea, and also the tracheoles. Okay, students. Next, the trachea, the spiracles which are oval and slit-like opening. First, the air passes into the spiracle, then it goes into the space that is called the atrium. From the atrium, it leads to the tube-like structure called the trachea. From the trachea, it passes into the tracheal cells, okay, into the tracheal cells, then it passes into the tracheoles, and those tracheoles are the fine branches of the trachea. The tracheoles are further penetrated inside through the tissue where they release the oxygen, okay, and similarly the carbon dioxide also is eliminated out. So, understood, the spiracles, trachea, tracheoles, and the cell which is present in the junction between the trachea and tracheoles is your tracheal cell, okay, which eventually help in carrying out the process of the respiration. And also lastly, we discussed the pulmonary respiration, in which the respiratory organ is the lungs. It is found in mostly all the, we can say, the most cases of the terrestrial animals. It is of two types, diffusion lungs and the ventilation lungs. Diffusion lungs, it is simple in structure, okay, it is simple in structure, and the gaseous exchange takes place through general diffusion. It is also found in the case of some spiders, snails, and also scorpions, etc. Ventilation lungs, it is generally typically found in the vertebrates, okay, in which the air passes through the tube into the elastic lungs, okay. Next, we have discussed that the lungs is present inside the thoracic chamber, and also we have discussed the passage of the air, okay, how the air passes from the nostrils up to the elastic lungs by the help of the bronchioles, lastly the branches of the bronchi, okay, and lastly also the examples under the ventilation lungs, obviously the reptiles, apes, mammals, and also etc. So students, today we discussed in detail about the tracheal respiration and also in detail about the pulmonary respiration. So that's all for today. We will meet in our next class. Thank you.